So, hey everybody, I'm Michele. I'm talking about how we built our design system for our mobile apps with React Native at JustWatch. So first of all, I have this QR code. If you want to take a picture of it, this links to a GitHub repo where I put the slides and a bunch of stuff. So you don't have to take pictures of all the individual slides. You can just look at them there. So why this talk? So everybody's building their own design system. The S stands for design system. You'll see this a lot in the slides, so I won't repeat it. So you see it a lot in social media, how it makes everything better. But I wanted to give you some insights on how this works in practice, like in an actual app. There's this idea that it might be overkill to create your own design system. It sounds like it's a high effort, high maintenance kind of job. So I wanted to give like info on our experience with it. So this is me. I'm a senior developer at JustWatch. I started working on the TV apps for JustWatch. Then I rewrote the mobile apps for the company in React Native. I love TypeScript, as it's pretty clear, and I'm spreading the sacred word, I guess. And I love React Native as well. But my background is actually from the backend stuff and native Android development. So I think it's fair to just let you know what I'm up to, so you know which opinions matter and which don't. I'm kind of an older guy, so I was working with Java and Python on the backend side stuff. But I've been working with React Native for the last 4-something years, so I grew to learn how to use it and love it. I mentioned JustWatch a couple of times. What's JustWatch? So it doesn't really matter with respect to the rest of the presentation, but just so that you know, it's a streaming guide. We're also A/B testing the onboarding stuff. So if this explains what it is to you, it means that it works. So you can search for your movies and TV shows. We have recommendations. You can set up your alerts for when new episodes or new series come out. And you have like the usual watch list that you can combine for all the streaming services. We have, of course, a website, which is like the main project for the company, mobile apps and TV apps. We have millions of users. I won't say how many because I don't think I'm allowed to. Despite a lot of people come in and giving us 1-star review because we don't pirate stuff, we still have some good numbers on the stores, so it's a decent app. So my experience with design systems. In my previous company, I rewrote the main app in React Native. It was kind of not the usual thing, so this was actually a native app that I rewrote to React Native. And the whole reason why I'm doing this presentation is to reuse that icon because I made it, and I think it looks awesome. So, yeah. I wrote the design system together with the new app. And surprise, surprise, that's the same thing that I did at JustWatch, actually with the same designer as well. In this case, it was a rewrite from Ionic, which is a framework that lets you write like web applications, but making them into native mobile apps. But using web views, so it's not exactly native. It's kind of a way to make it work. And again, I rewrote the design system together with the app rewrite. Also, this qualifies me. Oh no! My beautiful animation. Yeah, see it again. Huh? So I was the. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So this was actually in the context of this conversation. It was like developers don't give a shit about design and you're kind of okay, but I'll take it. So what am I going to talk about today? So StoryBook, of course, I mentioned it in the title, so I'm going to tell you what StoryBook is. I'll show you the mobile design system that we created. I'll share you some ideas and tips and opinions about what works, what doesn't, what works better with design systems. And so we can start with StoryBook. So this is just like how StoryBook looks. Like this is taken from their website. They call it a workspace or something, but it's actually a framework or library that you can use to showcase parts of your app or a whole library, like in our case, because we're using StoryBook to build a design system, so we use it to showcase all of the components in a design system. It's first and foremost a web framework, so it works with React, Vue, Angular, Svelte. It works with a lot of other libraries and frameworks as well. It has a React Native version, which unfortunately is not like an official project. And the reason why I say it is just that like when we had to upgrade our Storybook version, it was kind of like a giant pain, but I wouldn't be so harsh on the developer because like he kind of got left alone supporting this thing, so it's hard. You can use it to either render it as a standalone app, which is what we do, or you can use it as part of your own app and just conditionally render either your app or Storybook just by setting some flags. It has a lot of plugins that you can use to make it do many things, which we'll take a look at right now. So, okay, so let's run Storybook. So this repo that I have here is the same repo that you will find on GitHub, where I linked it before. And it's just a basic repo. I just fixed a couple of things, and I added a couple of other things that we'll see. So this is Storybook. You have on the left a list of components or screens. You can decide whatever goes there. And the names are taken just from the variables that you use, like it's the variable names of the components that you export. We'll see that in a second on the code. And you can decide what gets rendered here. So you can showcase how a button looks, and you have like a main docs page which can be written with Markdown if you want to. We didn't use it much, but if you want to have like a fancy thing where you describe how things are supposed to look and stuff, you can use Markdown. Or you can just export the individual components like it's done here, and you can actually interact with it. And if you notice, there's this action thing that gets populated with the events that are triggered. And you can play with the controls here. It's too small. Well, yeah, okay, here we go. So here, what you see here are the props that the component receives, and you can actually play with that real time, and it will just re-render whatever it is. And it re-renders in real time, and it's pretty nice. So you can see what effect each prop has to the component that you're seeing there rendered. So looking at the code, how this thing is done. So this is the actual button component that they use. It's just a regular button, and you can see that they're forwarding whatever props that you pass to it to the actual button HTML component in this case, because this is Storybook Web. And so what you can do is, for example, you have the on-click handler, which you can just set. And so now I put just a message there, so you can see that in real time, it doesn't do anything. I don't know. Why isn't it doing anything? Huh, okay. Yes, because I'm dumb. Because I was changing this component, because as you can see, this is called warning, this component that I exported. And as I was telling you before, the components that are rendered by Storybook have the same name as the variable that you use. So this is the warning component here to the left. And now if I press, it actually works. Something that, like a thing that you can do with Storybook Web, which you can't unfortunately do with React Native, but I read that there are plans to make it work as well, is to have some tests in Storybook already. And you do this just by specifying this play field inside the Storybook configuration. And as you can see here, you have this component that's passed to you, and you just say, okay, within, this is kind of like some testing libraries, I don't know, like Jest or Cypress, or one of those testing libraries, so you can mimic user events. So this is like the user clicking on the button automatically. And so, yeah, this already did it, but if I render it like this, you can see that it does it automatically. And when you look at this interaction step, it runs all your tests. This is pretty cool. Unfortunately, it's not in React Native yet, but there are plans to make it work, at least from what I understood. So I also have the same setup for Storybook React Native, like with just the basic project that's checked out using their guides, but I don't have much time, so I'll just show you afterwards when I show you the JustWatch version of it. So talking about JustWatch, our design system, so just to give you some stats, it's 76 exported components, meaning that we have more, but they're not exported, so they're just reused by other components. And we created 297 stories. So each of those things in the left-hand side of the Storybook interface that you saw before, it's called a story. I don't know why. But that's like a specific flavor that you want to test of your component. And we have about 300 of those. In terms of high effort, like that part was a question, it took about 6 months to build V1 of this design system. Of course, we're still expanding it and working on it, but it was just a one developer effort, and I was doing it while rewriting the main app, so it's not a big thing, I would say. We had some clear goals in mind, though. So we didn't want to think about the next 5 years of where this thing might go. We just wanted to have the components that we're using right now. Of course, thinking like, I don't know, 3 months in advance of what might happen, but not just designing the world just because we can, or writing guidelines about everything. But something that we really wanted to have is a strict design system, meaning that you shouldn't be allowed to create something that goes completely out of the scheme, because one of the problems that we had with the previous app was just that we had so many styles, and each page had its own flavor of this component or this other component, and yeah, it doesn't look good. At the same time, we didn't want to have stuff written in stone, so we were open to changes in the future and trying to think of what might be the future of this component or this guideline. At the same time, we didn't want it to be high maintenance, again, from the previous questions, and I think we succeeded at this. So this is the history of the commits for the design system specifically. V1 is around, like you see that peak in October, that's where V1 was. And then you can see that, of course, we worked on it and we expanded it, but it doesn't look like it's crazy to maintain it. And of course, we added more components, so it's not like we're getting back to the design system every time to fix issues or whatever. We decided to go for a separate repo. So the design system is its own project and its own node module that we import using an internal NPM registry. Because of issue number 1 of the Metro bundler, we cannot symlink it to the main app because it just doesn't work. So there's this tool that's called Yalk. So if you're interested in building an external NPM package that you import in another app, you can use this Yalk, which is like an internal registry that you can publish stuff to, and you just import it, and it's as if you were downloading the package from NPM every time, but it's just local, so you can just work on it before publishing it to the registry. So we did this also because we wanted to have a separate app for the design system, which is built using Expo, so that we could publish it using the Expo Go app, so that designers, product managers, whoever wants to try out the design system on an actual device, because it's important to test components where they're actually going to be used. We wanted to have it as an EAS update kind of thing. So another demo. This is actually our design system this time. So I'll start building it, I think, because it's kind of, wait, this is the other one, this one. Okay, so again, this is Yarn StoryBook. So the previous example that I showed you was using Vite, so it's much faster. Wait, I just needed to kill the other one first. Here we go. Yeah, this one is using Vite, as you can maybe see. So it's much faster. This one is using Webpack, and I think now we just updated to Webpack 5, so it's somewhat faster, but it's still much slower. So I can tell you a little about our design system. So we have a number of components that are starting from basic components like buttons, font styles, colors, and stuff like that, to pretty complex components like this buy box thing that I will show. Like this is the code for this buy box, and it has a number of props. It's very configurable. It's kind of in many places in the app, so you can tune it to however you want it to work. This is actually the most complex of our components in a design system, and this is how our design system works. So what I do most of the time is I just use the web interface as much as possible, and then I just move to the device when it's time to actually say, okay, I'm done. Let's see if it actually works like I think it does on a phone as well, because it doesn't always happen. Sometimes some things layout-wise can be slightly different. And as I was telling you, we have like these basic components like buttons, which everybody shows in every design system ever. So we have our types, so we have our flavors of buttons. You can disable a button, it grays out, and it doesn't take touches anymore. Something that is not configured by default in StoryBook, but we have, is the integration with Figma. So you can link to a Figma project and component so that you can compare it just where the component is. Now I play with it, but this is how it was supposed to look. And so you can actually go crazy about being pixel perfect if you want to, and you can just see it from there. This is a link to our Figma, because of course the design system is, of course, StoryBook and the code, but it's also the Figma project that the designers use to actually design layouts and stuff. So we have a bunch of other things that are interesting here. So for instance, there's this docs tab, which changed place in the current version of StoryBook. It was that markdown thing that I mentioned. Now they moved it to the left, but in React Native it's still here. So you can see the component here. You can see all the props with all the definitions that are taken from TypeScript directly. So all the props, you declare the TypeScript definition and it picks it from there. And you can also change them directly from here. So I like to use this tab more than the canvas one actually. And there's this show code button, which is pretty cool. And it's the code that rendered that thing. So you can just copy and paste it in your app if you're using the design system from a different app, and it will render that thing. You can also kind of cheat there. So for instance, we have this like a showcase of all of our font styles. And you can actually tell StoryBook what to render here. This isn't actually what's in the code, but it's what you would use, because when you're writing the stories in StoryBook, so let's take a look, for example, at this buy box thing that I was saying is pretty complex. So you can write stories that actually manage state. So for instance, this component has tabs, and you can click on the tabs, and it will show you different stuff. And this is done within StoryBook so that the story itself has the state management that's usually done by the app. So looking at the code. In the buy box story, you can see that we have this component, that's this buy box story thing, where we have the use state and for all of the fields that we want to change according to where the user tapped. And so you can set, okay, so if I tap on the best tab, I'll set this filter and whatever. But that's actually what the app does normally. So you can recreate whatever the app do within StoryBook. Other things that are interesting here are that we have this bunch of presets for a number of devices. So you can see how it's rendered on a Samsung S9, an iPhone 11 Pro, whatever. You can set it landscape or portrait. You can always zoom in on things. Of course, it's going to render what it's going to render. But it's interesting if you want to look at some specific details. You can always turn this thing on, which tells you all the paddings and margins and borders, and it just gives you the actual number that's being rendered by StoryBook. You can use this thing, which I never use, but if you want to, sure. Yeah, you can set different backgrounds, you can set a grid, you can do whatever. But yeah, so this is what we do with our design system. So let me go back to the slides, because I have more. So some ideas about writing your design systems. So if you have the option to, it's always nice to start from scratch. So if you have a greenfield app, start right away writing your design system, because that makes you write your building blocks first, which forces you to organize your screens, even if you don't have them yet. So you have to think of what components you want to have eventually, and it's something that maybe sometimes people just wing it, and it's like, we'll see. I mean, maybe this and that. But if you have to write a design system for it, you're kind of forced to actually think about it a bit deeper. So that gives you a lot of consistency, and your app starts looking somewhat good from day one. And it's not like you will have a second pass and it's like, wait, now I'm building stuff just real quick and then I'll just fix it later, because that never happens. But of course, in reality, there are situations in which you have an already existing app. So my suggestion there is to take a snapshot of the current situation and simplify it as much as possible. This is kind of like what they do in databases, like normalize it until it hurts and denormalize it until it works. Same thing with design systems, just get as few components as possible. But then, of course, you will have exceptions. It's like, oh, but in this case, I really need this prop, which is not elegant, but I need it. And so then you find what these props are or what variants you need, and then you just make it happen. One thing that's important in that case is that you can start with something small. You can say, okay, let's start building buttons and colors and fonts, but which is not that small actually, but it's just 3 main components. But once you decide to go for it, don't make exceptions. Like, don't let the other developers or yourself to just write, oh, in this one case, I will just use this CSS or this styles, because then you will never catch up. There's a real chance that you will never catch up, and then you will have both things living at the same time and fighting each other, and that's a nightmare. More ideas. Since I'm a TypeScript guy, keep types as strict as possible. So for instance, if you have a color prop, don't make it a color value, which is like React Native's version of a string that's with a specific template, like, I don't know, RGB or a hex or something, but make it a key in your possible colors. Because otherwise, people can just say, oh no, for just this one, I'll just have a slightly lighter flavor of blue for some reason. So don't do that, just give them options. And the same applies for margins, paddings, just numbers in general. Don't let them use numbers because that's a recipe for disaster. Just give them union types of what these might be. Most of the time, you won't need to have margins and paddings because you just set it within the component. So if it's small, it will have a smaller margin. If it's big, you will have a bigger margin. But in some cases, you might need to concede that, let's say. So like if this goes inside of a flat list, maybe it's just more convenient to set a margin as opposed to create a view that's just for the layout. It's just more efficient. But in that case, just try as much as possible to just give options and never let it open. Same thing with fonts. We actually have one font component for each style, which makes it somewhat easier. But again, don't let that open. And in the same, like for the same line of reasoning, don't let people just set the style prop and just go crazy and change everything in your component because it's going to break. For some components, you might have like a very low level component that's just a thin wrapper over something. In that case, it's fine, of course, to just forward whatever style props you have. But whenever you have styles set in your components, remember to make it a compile time error to use it, because otherwise you just override stuff. You just say, okay, style equals to this. I don't care what you pass me. And people are going to get mad because they're like, oh, I'm setting, I don't know, the font to red and it's not working. You need to use the omit interface. So for instance, if you want to omit, you get like an interface that extends the view props, except for style. You need to make it happen so that users will get an error, users of your design system, of course, will get an error and they will know right away that it's not supposed to be passed. So it's important to think as a user of your design system. So think whenever you create a component, wouldn't it be great if this behave this way, if I set this prop this way, and be consistent. So if there's a name that's used everywhere in React Native, so for instance, onPress, don't set onClick, onPressed, or slight variations of what it is because it makes people angry. Just go for whatever the basic component that you're wrapping uses and just reuse that. Keep as much logic as possible out of the design system, meaning if you have internationalization, that's outside of the scope of the design system because otherwise it becomes harder to manage real quick. So just strings are strings. Like if there's a label, you just pass me the label. I don't care what language it is. Just you set it. I'll just render it. In general, if you want to manage state, it's nice if you have a design system library to have it rendered as control components. Unless there are some components that are very basic, like, I don't know, you have a toggle, you don't expect the toggle to have a value that you have to update yourself, but if I press the toggle, I want it to be on or off automatically and maybe notify me of what the new state is. But aside from that, it's nice to delegate as much of the logic outside of the design system, because then it's immediately more flexible, because you can do whatever of the logic. I'll just render in based on the set of props that you're passing me. This is the last idea slide, but I have another two. So yeah, typography is like very important. It's fundamental. So if you start with the right set of fonts and line heights, then everything kind of follows. Like if you use a grid system, set those right, because it will save your life. Like that speeds everything up tremendously. This is not really a hot take, but it kind of became one. Do use memo, use callback, optimization stuff. In my opinion, this is the part that's a hot take, I guess. In my opinion, it's a better default to use these all the time than to never use it, because otherwise you will re-render stuff, and especially in React Native, re-renders can be very expensive because you might also cross the bridge in some cases, and so defend against that. I know that like if you're writing your own design system, you're also the person using it, but sometimes you might forget, and then you just trigger re-renders, and if it's a design system component that's used everywhere, it will trigger renders everywhere. This is just a hint, like keep your components hierarchy flat, so it's easier to find the components, so you don't need to go and think, oh, what folder might this component be, where do I look for it? And so it's easy. But if you still want to have folders because you have so many components that they become unwieldy, just use a barrel. So just use an index file that exports all of the others. So it's easier to say import button from my design system instead of saying import button from my design system /button/button, because it's super annoying. And barrels are kind of not very well seen, of course, because they kind of mess with tree shaking. But this is for React Native, so you don't really care too much. And at the same time, your design system is not meant to be used by the world at large. And if it is, yeah, cheers to you. But like all the components are probably going to be used by your app. So it doesn't really matter if you're importing all of them, because you will use all of them. So my takes, there are not my company's takes. A design system makes your developer life easier, because it shortens the cycles between designers and developers, because you kind of learn from each other. So maybe in the beginning you will get a bit of feedback back and forth, like, oh, this thing that you designed is not really the optimal way, because if you design it just with this small change, it makes my life much easier. And then designers usually learn. Surprise, surprise. And the next time they will just give you the right specs right away, and you don't need to go back and clarify everything all the time, because like once you agree on a set of principles, then it kind of streamlines your experience on both sides. Like having a design system, of course, has fewer opportunities for mistakes. Like, I don't know, I set a wrong margin, a wrong padding. You just catch them while you're designing the components. And once you have your components, it's just faster to build them Lego style. This, of course, applies even if you just write the components within your app. But I think the added value to writing it on a design system library that's separate from your app is that you have this moment in which it's like, okay, is this component okay? So we just review this thing. Is it clear what it does? Is it clear what the props do? And it's kind of more official. And of course, this gives you consistency, which we all want. Something that we do is that whenever we have new components, we start with the components within the app until it's clear that it's something that it's more official. So it's going to be reused by multiple screens, for example, because this essentially speeds everything up, because you're like, okay, I just need this thing for this experiment, and maybe it will be thrown away in a week. So you don't need to go crazy about documenting each prop and everything. So by default, unless we know that there's a bigger feature that has a number of components that are going to be reused across screens, we just start with a component inside the app, and then we extract it to the design system once the need arises. Another hot take is that I don't think you really need a style library like NativeWin, like the Tailwind React Native version, or style components, or any of those. Because once you write your own set of components, you can just use the basic styles that React Native comes with. And I haven't felt the need, oh, if only I had this library to make this easier. I think they're not really needed if you use a design system. So if you build a design system, you really need to care. So component names are important, prop names are important, prop value types are important. So whatever decision you take is something that will affect other developers' lives. So it's not like you can half-ass it and just say, oh, I'll just call it whatever, and they will figure it out, because that's how people will stop using your design system. So you need to make everything like immediately understandable, and everything needs to be obvious. And at the same time, you don't want to create foot guns everywhere so that people just keep making mistakes because you give them too much freedom to set parameters that they really don't need and don't want. So you need to kind of guide their choices. Because after all, you're building a library. So it's as if you're kind of an internal library developer and maintainer. So you need to care about your users. If you find a good designer, your life will be much easier. It's not easy, but if you find one, just cling to this designer. Don't get HR involved. Just metaphorically cling to the designer, because it makes your life much, much easier. And you are making your ChatGPT or whatever its job easier, because then you give ChatGPT the components and like, make me the screen. And it's so much easier because everything is coded already and they don't need to figure anything out. So that's it. Thank you.